We don't just need more energy, we need a lot more energy, and we need to be able to deploy power generation that is resilient, reliable, and clean very, very quickly. This really is a special day in the history of energy.
We have a lot of work to do.
You can create all the energy you want, but if we can't get it to the people who need it, then it might not be quite as useful.
The demand growth for energy is just unbelievable.
It's a great place for Bitcoin, great place for nuclear. It's a match made in heaven.
Joining us on stage are Brandon Gibson, Chris Mowry, Patrick Brown, and Nikki Hashemian Sizemore.
Hello, everybody. I am not Chuck Fleischman, in case you were wondering. Thank you for the laugh. That was the correct response. Unfortunately, or fortunately for Tennessee, Congressman Fleischman was delayed in D.C. and wasn't able to be here today for this panel. I think he's on his way. But before I start, I just want to say that Tennessee is blessed indeed to have a nuclear champion like Chuck Fleischman in Congress. And I hate that all of you aren't able to hear from him today, but I commonly refer to him as a Tennessee treasure and a national treasure, and that is indeed what he is. But I'm honored to be here today to moderate a panel of nuclear movers and shakers in Tennessee and the country. And I'm super excited to hear what our panelists have to say today, and hope that you will learn a lot and be inspired by what they have to share. So to start out, I want to kind of throw you a little bit of a curveball. It won't be hard, I promise. Introduce yourself in about 30 seconds to the group. And then I want you to tell us one thing in either your professional or your personal life that has really excited you over the last month. And I think I know what yours might be.
Yes. So I'm Chris Mowry. I'm the CEO of Type 1 Energy. And what's really excited me in the last month actually happened a few hours ago when the Tennessee Valley Authority announced the world's first letter of intent to construct a fusion power plant using our technology. And so this really is a special day in the history of energy.
That's great. Patrick Brown, SVP of Centrist. I don't know how I can top that, right? First fusion announcement. In the last month, we have put two strong proposals to expand our enrichment facility, both LEU and HALEU. So super excited to restore America's energy dominance and ability to enrich uranium at scale. So not as big as the fusion, but to me, near and dear to my heart. We're very excited.
All right, well, it's a pleasure to meet you all and great to be at Belmont. I went here for law school, so it's always nice to be back and see how beautiful they've expanded. So I'm Nikki Hashemian Sizemore. I represent Kairos Power. I do our government affairs. I'm gonna take it personal since both of them did a professional. I had a baby 6 months ago, so thank you. Big exciting thing is she is rolling over onto her stomach, and if you've had a child or you're a new parent, that's a huge thing. So appreciate the opportunity to cheer her on and let you guys know about it.
I love it. I love it. We're complete human beings, and our personal lives certainly play into our professional lives as well. So we're going to dive right into the meat of the matter. And our first question, I'd like to start with you, Chris, and then we'll just go down the line. So we hear a lot about making the United States the global leader in nuclear energy. And there are a lot of great announcements that are happening, that have happened over the last few months, that we anticipate over the next few years. and a lot of action that's happening. What frameworks or policies in this country would there need to be in order to make this not just a talking point and a trend, but a real driver behind making America energy independent now and 30 and 40 years into the future?
Yeah, great question. And we are indeed on the cusp of a whole series of new projects powered by traditional nuclear fission, fusion energy. And these projects, a lot of them involve new technology solutions. And as you look to the public markets for funding in order to actually launch these projects, to finance these projects, government has a role to catalyze and de-risk these first-of-a-kind projects. And I think one of the things that will make a big difference in terms of determining where the U.S. is regarding energy leadership in the future is whether or not it steps forward and puts in place the policies and the other mechanisms in order to take that, what I'll call first-of-a-kind risk for the companies that are trying to deliver these first projects that have this promise to deliver that energy independence that you're talking about.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. I mean, government has a clear role to de-risk, the front end, especially for nth-of-a-kind type projects that are higher risk. But the audience may not know, I mean, we used to dominate uranium enrichment. We invented it, and we used to, supply the world. Then we lost it. So we have a lot of work to do to really rebuild that capability. And that's what our company's trying to do. The DOE, has some funding they're going to release that's going to, rectify that and rebuild domestic fuel cycle. But, what framework needs to be in place is really, we have to provide fuel for all these technologies that are going to be, starting up shortly. The Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, 9 of the 10 used HALEU fuel. Much HALEU is being enriched now. We have the only facility in Piketon, Ohio, and it's a demonstration. So you can go to the DOE, there's 21 metric tons there. That might be 1 or 2 core loadings. That's nothing. So we have to massively scale, and there's fortunately some, due to the strong support we have from, the congressman's not here today, but we do have some money to get going on that. So.
Yeah, I also echo all of my fellow colleagues' sentiments about there's a big responsibility and role, I think, for the government to play, both federally and on the state side. They all mentioned the DOE side of it. Kairos Power, we are a recipient of a program called the ARDP, which is the Advanced Demonstration Project. We are a tier 2, so we go under a risk reduction opportunity, as Chris was saying. These front-end costs are significant. It's having programs like that allow innovative technology to kickstart, to get off the ground. We put a lot of private capital into it, and the way our program is structured is we do a milestone-based contract, which is a little novel for DOE, where we do the work and then we get paid for it. So we're really focusing on finding that public-private partnership where they're just as much invested in what we're doing to not only get the work, but get the capabilities on it. Since Brandon is sitting here, I'm gonna make an amazing plug for all the work that she has done, and so has Governor Lee and the rest of the team, on advanced nuclear in the space. Not only in the federal side, it's really up to states to step up as well, and Tennessee has done a phenomenal job of that. We have the governor producing an executive order that really catalyzed and started this whole movement. As a native Tennessean, I'm gonna say I think he's the reason that all these other states are following, and I think Brandon would agree with that. But starting this council that was really taking a strategic approach at looking at what the industry needs to do to create Tennessee as a hub of advanced nuclear. And I think you're seeing that with Chris's company, my company as well. We're breaking ground here and have broken ground and are pouring concrete in Oak Ridge for advanced technology. But in addition to that, there's also state funding. Federal dollars are big and vast, but don't discount what the state is doing. Tennessee's provided a fund of about $50 million. I think they just recently increased that. And it's those signals too for companies that are looking at where opportunities, where can we site, who is gonna be our workforce, what are the economic incentives, and how do we build this out? So I think Tennessee has done a great job, and that's a model we hope to see in other states and are starting to see.
And that leadership that Tennessee showed is palpable for me. I'm coming from the Northeast, where nuclear power just 2 years ago wasn't even considered a clean technology. At COP26 in Glasgow, nuclear couldn't even come into the public pavilion. So it was almost ostracized to come to Tennessee, where it's embraced, supported. It sounds like it's a great place for Bitcoin, great place for nuclear. It's a match made in heaven. So.
Yeah, I think maybe to add to that, the governor's nuclear fund brought Type 1 Energy to the state of Tennessee. And
You were the first recipient of funding from the fund.
Yes. And so I think that's a great example where government policy can catalyze and nucleate private sector to do the heavy lifting. And that, I think, is really important. It's that beginning nucleation, that the catalyst that brings us together to de-risk the whole venture rather than thinking about government funding everything, right? And I think that fits within the broader framework of how we think government's role should be, not only in energy, but frankly, more broadly in society.
And that's on the front side, getting the funding to de-risk. Also, when you start building these plants, you need a workforce. So you need local and state support to kind of build the workforce of the future, really to get the community acceptance, the social license, so we can operate. A lot of that's at the state and local level. So it really is a partnership from the top to the bottom.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, thank you for the plug.
Welcome.
And for everyone following suit to talk about how great Tennessee is. I'm very happy about that. I hope, my boss is listening somewhere out there, that he hears all the compliments, and we appreciate that. I think, Chris, you hit on something that's really important, and the governor views that government's not the answer. It can't be the only source of funding, or it can't be the only thing. It takes public participation with private entities in order to really solve the biggest challenges that we have. And he's taken that approach with everything. Let me take that question and sort of turn it on its head, though. As government can be the catalyst, government can also sometimes be the impediment. And we were talking backstage about nothing to do with nuclear, but cell phone jamming technology. We can't jam cell phones in prisons because of a nearly 100-year-old federal law that prohibits that. And every time we turn around, there is a law or regulation that was well-intended probably at the time, but is antiquated or just doesn't work and hasn't progressed as technology has progressed. This crowd probably sees that every time it turns around. So what are some ways that government should really look at regulation differently and try to change regulation to meet the speed of business? And it may be in the particular work you do, it may be more along the transmission perspective, because you can create all the energy you want, but if we can't get it to the people who need it, then it might not be quite as useful. Patrick, we'll start with you.
Sure.
And go down the line and end with Chris.
Right. So it is fashionable to bash the NRC and some other people, but we've had great experience with them. When we give them, we're very transparent with them, but this is the Advanced Act that was recently passed that's going to help with licensing. So there is some momentum there. We'll watch and see how effective that is. What really is impressive is the recent DOD, where they offer land. Hey, come build on our site. Can expedite the environmental siting and permitting. That's what really killed a lot of projects. So there has been some positives. I would say there's some one-off things we could repeal. There's this blended finance problem where a government agency can't give 2 awards to one project. That might have worked in the old world, but it might not maybe for fusion. You might want to give a grant for the front end to de-risk construction, and then maybe a loan guarantee to help lower the interest rate for the long-term debt longer term. But you can't do that today, but it's a simple fix. So there's a little one-off, financial things we could do. NRC will watch and see how effective they are. There's a lot of opportunity there, but those are some things that come to mind.
Yeah, I'll maybe go back to Chris's point about, or excuse me, not Chris, Patrick, his point about NRC. So I would say there's a lot of positive momentum. As you mentioned, this administration is taking a particular look at just regulatory across the board. For those of you that are less familiar with nuclear, we're highly regulated, and part of that is where we site our reactors. So every time we site a new reactor, we have to go through a good portion of new licensing structure, new environmental reviews. I'd say one opportunity is that environmental review process. That can be a linchpin in kind of the whole scheme. People like to point and say that nuclear is slow and that things can't move fast, but I think there's now the timing is ripe to get things to move fast. And one obvious, easy opportunity, and that's why you hear it consistently, that's why Congress is taking it up, is doing things with NRC. But on the backside of that, I don't want to necessarily have you take away the opinion that the NRC is bad. There are opportunities within it, chances to look at the regulatory structure right now and find ways to make it work. Kairos has done a great job of fitting into the system and just having the agency rethink about how they're taking licensing, taking more of a holistic approach, getting a team application as opposed to working in siloed factions. Because of kind of that innovative feeling and progress, we've been able to get through the licensing pathway significantly fast. So we got our constructions license in about 18 months. This was prior to them now saying 18 months as a standard review. But then we had a second construction license get approved almost in under a year. So there's ways to work the system, but I do think that there's opportunities to look at it from a more broad perspective. Not only does the NRC interplay to what we're doing, so does environmental review, APA, and things like that. So having that cross-section, which I think is what we're starting to see and what the emphasis is in this administration is having those agencies work together. Like Patrick said, there's the DOD, the DOE element. I think looking at it from a more holistic perspective of where agencies can all fit and help expedite, as opposed to just giving the onerous and the responsibility to one agency, is where I think we can start moving faster and more innovative.
And you brought up interconnections. I heard you hint at that. I'm coming from a utility up in the Northeast, and we'd have Google or Amazon saying, hey, I want to connect this data center. When can I come by next week to turn it on? And we would tell them, okay, come back in 10 years, and we can talk about it. So there's a lot of work the utilities can do on the interconnection front, and they're doing a lot today. But I don't know if the Bitcoin miners in the room, if you run into those issues, but very similar to when you try to connect a nuclear plant.
Excuse me. Maybe I'll actually talk about what looks like a great success story that's just about to finish. So one of the promises of fusion energy is that it could be regulatory light and that it could be regulated in a different way than traditional nuclear. And that journey started about 3 or 4 years ago with the federal government and the NRC. But ultimately, that was remanded down to the state level. And the state of Tennessee has taken the lead for the U.S. in terms of states in developing a regulatory infrastructure for fusion energy that makes it look a lot more like permitting or licensing a hospital that does nuclear medicine than a traditional nuclear fission power plant. And the opportunity there is an opportunity to really lever the advantage of fusion energy and allow you to scale deployment of fusion power plants in a really remarkable way. I mean, if you think about the timeline to deploy traditional nuclear, and unfortunately the real challenges that we have on the regulatory side in fusion, we're working toward a process that ought to be able to permit a fusion power plant in less than 6 months. And that's really remarkable. And again, when we think about the growing demand for energy powered by AI and data centers and this type of thing, we don't just need more energy, we need a lot more energy. And we need to be able to deploy power generation that is resilient, reliable, and clean very, very quickly. And so you need to look at kind of the long poles in the tent on that process. And one of them for sure is the regulatory process and the permitting process. And so we've come a long way in the last 3 or 4 years, and we're really kind of on the 5-yard line now in terms of laying out a process to permit fusion power plants here in Tennessee that can really be done very, very efficiently and enable rapid scaling of this technology to meet the demand.
I promise I did not pay them to vote on Tennessee quite like they have, but I appreciate it. I think one of the interesting things about this entire industry is that as an industry, although individually, the companies that are represented here have done a really good job of bringing government into the tent at a very early stage and have conversations about what you need from a regulatory perspective and what is appropriate regulation and what's fair. And how to work with government. Just a few months ago or a few weeks ago, I was at Kairos's construction site looking at what's being built, and being able to see it with your own eyes really is a big deal. It helps you understand from the government perspective what you're dealing with and how to be a support and how to be a partner to industry in a way that hopefully is the new norm for the way government interacts and regulates. So nuclear power, of course, has a lot of bipartisan support across this country, especially right now. But I joke in the office that I'm always looking for the boogeyman around the corner. So a shift to a more hostile federal government could pose some risks to ongoing nuclear development projects. How does the industry prepare for scenarios like that? Nikki, we'll start with you.
Sure. These are long-term projects, and like Brandon said, there's a lot of bipartisan support. There's a lot of public support. I think we're at a space, and maybe my colleagues will disagree, where we finally are at, the time is right. Everything's moving in the right direction. A lot of work you guys are doing is helping catalyze the industry, helping people understand the significance, the importance, and the role that nuclear has with it. I think one way to sort of, circumvent some of that is these are long-term projects, regardless of the administration. Once we start getting going, they're here to stay. We're building a lot of support. We're working effectively within the government. Thinking broadly from, changes and tensions and things like that, we're really focused on what we can control and what we can do. And with that is some of our supply chain aspects, is making sure that we're in control of our own destiny, of not being overly reliant on foreign entities or foreign suppliers for that. And so we think that, the trend is there where things should stay as they are and progression should keep going forward. And there's just continued momentum and support. But it is something I think all of us will be mindful of if there is a shift in attitude.
Chris?
Well, governments do change eventually. And so, just like any other business risk, you try to single failure proof yourself. And so one of the great things about fusion that we find really exciting is that it is much easier to think about creating an export market for our technology. And so when we think about industry here in Tennessee and what we're trying to build in Tennessee, yes, of course, it is to support and address the Tennessee market and the U.S. market, but the global demand for this type of energy is a $1 trillion a year market, right? And so I think as it relates to industry, the ability for us to look, again, getting back to the original theme around leadership in energy, to be a global leader means you need to be able to address that global market. And I think in some ways, fusion is uniquely positioned to take advantage of that. The regulatory light infrastructure of this, the broad social acceptance of a technology that's really the power of the stars, is something that really lets us address a global market and in a way kind of de-risks, let's say, more provincial changes in government. Luckily, we don't see that in the near term, but again, you need to think about the long term.
Yeah, it's important to understand that, we're talking about the nuclear renaissance. Some of you haven't been around a while. This isn't the first one, right? So there was one before. I'm not sure if you know the timing, but it was about the timing of the Bitcoin white paper. So October 31st, 2008, when the white paper was released. I was thinking about AP1000s at the time. It was a different world, but different dynamics. So back then it was very much government push. There wasn't a lot of customer pull at the time. Flat load growth. It was a world where, Russia was providing a lot of uranium. It wasn't a geopolitical issue. Very different than today, where there's a lot more bipartisan support. Now it's seen as a climate tool. Now we have is customer demand. We've diversified the financing stack, which I think is the key thing that's going to de-risk this. We have, hyperscalers, providing direct investment to a lot of these developers all along the fuel cycle. You have new forms of private players that are coming to kind of make these plants more robust, because the last renaissance ultimately went head-to-head with Fukushima, fracking, horizontal drilling, and it was all government funding pretty much, and state regulators. There wasn't a backup private funding supply. So I think the social acceptance, as you mentioned, and a more diverse array of players providing money is going to help this time around.
Well, let me take Patrick's answer and Nikki's answer and mash them together a little bit. These are very long-term projects. I hear 10, 20, 30 years regularly when I have conversations with folks in the nuclear space. So they're long-term projects, but political cycles are definitely not long-term. Patrick, to your point, do you believe that America can truly sustain a nuclear industry like we're talking about and imagining and dreaming about through market forces and market dynamics and innovation alone, or is it going to require long-term, consistent federal government support?
To your point, like we were talking about, it's going to, diverse actors. Everyone has their role. The government, as we talked about, upfront de-risking some of these first-of-a-kind projects, providing testing grounds. We've done this before in the 60s, the 50s and 60s with the advanced reactor designs, where we've, have done this before. That's important to remember. We just have to build the muscle memory back. So the government has a role, but I think private market has to play a bigger role this time around to, like we said, diversify the sources of capital to make sure it's sustainable.
Nikki?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Patrick. The government does have a role. Is it the government's job to fund all nuclear projects all the way through? No. What we're doing is different. The funding we receive is really, again, I want to differentiate. It's not getting money just to do the work. It's getting money to build out capabilities, which I think are long-term things. We're developing a workforce. We're creating supply chain streams. We're doing advanced manufacturing. There's a role in it, in that it, as Patrick said, either de-risks it or kickstarts it or catalyzes it or gets the emphasis in it, and then you all have a role. Your industry is really what's bringing us all to the table here. I'm not as well seniored in this industry as others, but I grew up in it, and I've seen sort of the ebbs and flows Patrick was mentioning. When I first started in nuclear at a different company, the whole catalyst, what was going to transition, what was going to get these plants online was coal to nuclear. That's still happening, but it's not as, I would say it's not as strong as what's happening in the room here, what you guys are doing. It's that advanced manufacturing, it's that AI, it's that Bitcoin, it's data centers, it's all of that. Without you guys, me, myself, I personally don't know if we'd be moving this fast. There's such a demand for it that I think, yes, the government has a role. They have the opportunity to make us go faster, more efficiently to help you. And that's why we were really strategic in our partnership with DOE. It's a milestone-based contract. This is something they've done in DoD space, and actually in NASA's kind of where we got the idea, is that we're building capabilities, get money for doing work. We have to meet these milestones to ensure that we're actually going to produce what we're going to do. And it's being really good stewards of that money that I think is an important part of it too. But I do think the private sector is really helping push the right levers. And without that emphasis, I don't think we'd see the government acting as fast as they are. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And customer pull, customer drive is very different. It's palpable. I don't want to be the guy that says this time it's different, but I'm going to say it. This time it's very different.
I think we got to challenge the assumption that you put out there, because otherwise I think this industry is going to be on the outside looking in. The reality of life is the demand growth for energy is just unbelievable. And I don't think society is going to wait around 20 or 30 years to build incrementally power plants. They're going to get energy from some other form. So if we want to be a part of that, and a major part of that, I think we have to rethink the whole process. I can only speak for Fusion and what we're doing in Type 1 Energy. I talked earlier about the regulatory process, but we're trying to architect just fundamental rethinking about deployment, at least the fusion type of nuclear, where you can think about siting and deploying a power plant in 3 years, not 30 years. That ought to be the vision here, right? Because that's the need. And if we're not going to supply that need, then it's going to come from someplace else, right? And I think we have to realize that this industry sits in a broader global energy space. And that global energy space is meeting the demand that's being put upon it. And who's going to supply that demand? I think we have an opportunity to provide this reliable, carbon-free energy that can last hundreds of thousands, millions of years. But we have to rethink how we're going to do this, because the train's leaving the station here, right? The demand is growing so rapidly. We have to rethink this paradigm of 20 or 30 years, because that's just not going to, it's just not going to line up with what's actually happening.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, today, every nuclear plant is like a custom design. I was a nuclear operator. I would operate a reactor at one plant. I'd go to another plant. The whole layout was different. It was all, due to, local, state, different regulations. We had to do different things. That's not going to cut it. That's how you get these long timelines. So the name of the game is standardization, then fleet level deployment, so you can ride down that experience curve. That's the only way we're going to be successful. So yeah, we got a whole fundamental change in how we deploy these. And I think small modular reactors, advanced reactor developers, that they've keyed in on that. And I think that's fundamental in the business models going forward.
All right, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball to you.
Another
one.
Yeah.
How many curveballs?
Another curveball. We started with a curveball, we'll end with a curveball.
I like it.
All right, the title of this conference is Imagine If. So imagine if 20 years from now, you can break anything that is happening now that isn't working. You can dream up anything that you think would make America more energy independent. What would the world look like from your particular area of expertise 20 years from now? Just dream it up. Imagine what it would look like. Nikki, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, great question. Yeah, 20 years, there would be Kairos reactors all over the country, which they will be. They will be there. I'm manifesting it. It's going to happen. And there'll be one in your backyard hopefully soon. I think we'd see that across the U.S. I will say we're a more domestic-focused company, so just in our own company perspective, I think advanced nuclear will not be so challenging. It will be online. It will be accessible. It will be providing baseload power. It will be in a cost structure that makes sense. And it'll be opportunity for others. It'll be the chance for different industries to get power from nuclear. We're looking at, AI, data centers is a big one. Looking at co-location. Maybe they maybe not operate, but they own their own nuclear reactor. They're supplying power to the grid while also utilizing it themselves. There's other industries that we can serve. Nuclear heat, that's another thing we didn't talk about. There's a whole industrial basis that can benefit from this type of technology that's starting to be explored. There's just so much application that I think will allow a significant amount of innovation. And then as we're seeing, and what the goal is of this administration, is this energy independence and dominance. Nuclear is technology of the US. We were leading in it and we lost. We've lost to China and Russia. They're continuously beating us. I would love to see in 20 years that we're back on top. That when we come to international companies, they're not leveraging what China and Russia can offer against us, that they're opening their doors, they're letting us in, which they are, but it's a struggle, and that we don't have to keep fighting, that our technology is far more advanced, our licensing and regulatory scheme is far more advanced, our manufacturing basis, that's the other side of it, is our supply chain. Our company, again, is vertically integrated. We're designing, developing, playing around, building systems. We're using manufacturing tools that are in pharmaceuticals to create prototypical fuel pebbles. Who would have thought of that? There's so many cross applications that are yet to be explored and should be explored. And then the workforce of it, as all of us start to come online, we're going to need a vast amount of employees across all different types of education, skill level. Everybody thinks you have to be a PhD to be a nuclear. You don't. You can be a pipe fitter or electrician, a welder. Man, welders, great job to go into. I think we're going to see just a whole ecosystem around it and increased innovation. We have limited time, so I'll stop and let others go.
Chris, shortly, what does 20 years look like if you just imagine what it looks like?
Well, if you would have asked me yesterday, I would say I would imagine if there would actually be a commercial fusion power plant. But today, it looks like that future is starting now. And so I have to change my answer. And it's really about scaling the commitment that TVA has made here to broadly deploy this technology and take advantage of everything that fusion can bring to society.
Great. Patrick?
We're out of time, but I'll just say total American energy dominance.
Great. Awesome. Thank everybody on the panel. Thank you.